Hey everyone, Cursed Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks. And here we have Arahbo, Roar of the World, Cat Tribal. This deck comes to us from Resting Hearts, who says, I'd love some feedback on my second commander deck. Arahbo with some surprises. I'm still undecided on how tall/wide to go, and so I was hoping to get some help on that. Well, thank you for the deck. We'll take a look and we can see what suggestions we have. As always, the deck list will be in the video description below, and I highly recommend you open up this deck list and take a look at it so that we can both look at the deck, see if there's any changes that we can suggest, and hopefully all together we can make a much better deck. So who is Arahbo and why are we using them as our cat commander? Arahbo. That's going to take me a few chances. Arahbo, Roar of the World, is a cat avatar with eminence, which means the most important thing about Arahbo is that its ability is always active. You don't need them on the battlefield in order to take advantage of it. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if Arahbo is in play or in the command zone, another target cat you control gets +3/+3 until end of turn. And then if Arahbo is out on the battlefield, it says whenever another cat you control attacks, you may pay 1 green white. If you do, it gains trample and doubles its power and adds its power to its toughness. You can just say pretty much doubles in strength. So Arahbo is a very strong eminence, like a very strong commander because it has eminence. Now, I believe it's one of the weaker eminence commanders, but the sheer power of eminence really outweighs the fact you can be, you can be in last place of some of the best people, and that'll bring up your level quite a bit. And it's the same thing here. The ability to power up one of your cats with +3/+3 per turn is not anything to sneeze at, especially when it's done for free every time. One of the downsides is that +3/+3 is not as strong as it is in one-on-one because your opponents have quite a bit of life. This is a little less than 10% of their life. However, it does bump up each of one of your cats to deal basically 10% of your opponent's health per turn, and that would probably be the direction I'd want to take this in. In addition, when you think about it in the way that +3/+3 is very valuable early in the game and gets a lot less valuable later in the game, it kind of brings in the idea that what you want is a very low to the ground quick deck. So we're going to try to make some suggestions and some changes based on that idea. So we're going to start with the curve. We're going to see the curve is really nice. 2 is strangely a bit lower than 1 and 3, and then we kind of immediately fall off. We have some 6 drops, we have some 9 drops, but both the 9 drops aren't actually 9 drops. Dusk to Dawn is particularly strong as it is a card you can cast from your graveyard with Aftermath, so it's actually 4 mana and then 5 mana. And the Party Tree is actually the Great Henge, and therefore will often cost considerably less than 9 mana. We can assume it'll often cost 4 mana, because we'll have a 2 power cat that becomes a 5/5 at least. And at 6 mana, we have Nactil Warpride, which we'll talk about, and Austere Command, which I think we can also talk about. But after which, we kind of have, a reduction in mana, and with 1 and 3 kind of being the highest ones. Now, what's important to also consider is Arahbo is not a 5-drop. If you ever want to cast Arahbo, you have to treat it like an 8-drop. And the reason that is that you're going to pay 5 to cast Arahbo, then you're going to give a creature +3/+3, one of your cats, and then you're going to be able to trigger to double its power and give it trample. That's 3 more mana. So you need 8 total mana if you want Arahbo's effect to go off, which I think you do. And to kind of answer, so I don't bury the lead, to answer Resting Heart's question, I believe you will be much more successful if this deck goes tall, because it's just going to be much more valuable. It's a lot easier. Cats don't have the same kind of lords as other tribes, so it's tougher to go wide and have other benefits for it. So we want to think very much so in the ways that we can grow tall. And just take the fact that we have cards that either make a lot of bodies or work well with a lot of bodies. We're just going to think of that as a bonus. We're not going to worry too much about it. So let's go really quickly for a few cards that I think stand out a little bit. Um, Nactil War Pride doesn't do anything. I guess, excuse me. I guess one of the strengths here is it. If you give a trample, you can then guarantee it's only being blocked by one creature, so you can trample through a lot of damage. But that's not going to happen. If you have a big creature, your opponents have a big creature, it won't really change much. And the main thing it does is whenever this creature attacks, it puts creatures of the same card in the same name. Now there's two ways to make that work. Either clones or you play a different format. And unfortunately, we don't have access to clones and we are playing this format. So I believe this text does almost nothing. I'm sure there's a really, really convoluted way to make it work, but I'm going to suggest that we don't use this card. It's a lot of mana, doesn't do what we want it to do. We can just toss it out. On the same end, Cassili's Slingers. Uh, this is just Mirari's Wake on a cat, but a 5 mana 3/5 is pretty bad. And we have a lot of ways, in fact, to destroy artifacts and enchantments. So I don't particularly feel like we need another one. And this is a lot of mana, so I'd rather get rid of that. Then we have Regal Caracal? I'm going to say Caracal. This cat. This is like our main cat lord outside of the much more superior. Where is our 3 mana? King of the Pride. Uh, this cat gives lifelink, which I like, but it's also 5 mana. I think I'm going to leave it because I think the fact that it gives lifelink really outweighs the fact that it just gives +1/+1. But this is close. I would have much rather this be trample, but obviously that's a harder thing for cats to get because cats tend to be a little smaller. So we have those in our high mana. The rest I almost universally agree with. I think those are fine. I see here in the sideboard, I think these are cards you're considering, but not in the there's a considering list. But Leonin Arbiter should 100% be played. It is a fantastic card, and yes, you should punish every single one of your friends by playing it. And Jazzle Goldmane, I think, is really, really good, as I think it is a card that gives you an option to go wide. Now I'm thinking about it, I'm kind of medium on it, but I don't think it's terrible. I think it's definitely a cat you can play. It having first strike is pretty cool. Then looking through the rest, I love the collection of instants. I think these are great. I think Austere Command feels a little weird. I do get what it's here for because you can selectively blow up the rest of the board and keep your creatures, but I don't know to what degree you actually want that effect that often, and 6 mana is quite a bit. Traverse the Outlands, likewise, is also a lot of mana. Both, like it's 5 mana and you need a creature with a lot of power. It feels like there's a lot of hoops to jump through. 5 mana isn't where you want to be ramping from. I think if you were going to ramp, you'd want to ramp at like 1 or 2, but not at 5. There's nothing you really want to hit at 5. Even if you get like 6 extra lands, let's say, you don't really have much that uses it. So I don't think this is really where you want to be, so I would cut that as well. Triumph of the Hordes is great, and we're probably going to play a few more of those. Okay, and the rest looks great. Duelist Heritage is really, really good. Rancor is great. Keen Sense is great. I think these are fantastic. So what are going to be my suggestions? Well, I think there's a few directions I want to go in. And almost all of them, I think the idea we should be using here is we want to be making the most of our commander's ability. So our commander's ability adds 3 power to any creature, any cat you control, just one of them, every turn. That's really good, and we want to use cards that capitalize on this increase in power. So we can see we have a few of them like Hunter's Insight, but I'm thinking about a few more. Uh, so I believe it's Overwhelming Stampede. Yes. Overwhelming Stampede is a really, really nice version of this card effect, and we can probably find a few more, but I think Overwhelming Stampede is going to be the most consistent of them. What Overwhelming Stampede does, it's an overrun effect, so all of our creatures gain power, toughness, and trample, but it's based on your strongest creature. Well, because this deck makes one really strong creature, this is particularly good. I am now realizing, however, by saying this, you don't have a chance to cast it. Interesting. Okay, maybe this doesn't work as well as I thought it would. Is it worth playing at all? Probably not. What about Pathfinder Ibex, Pathbreaker Ibex? This might work a little better. It's not a cat, but it works in the same way, and it's an on attack trigger, so you will get this trigger off correctly. So it does the exact same thing as overwhelming a stampede, but instead it triggers on attack. So what you're going to do is you're going to use this. You're going to still grow your cat as normal, and when it attacks, that cat would spread its power over all your other creatures, including the Ibex, including any other cats. And I think that's a really nice way to turn a tall creature into a wide board state. In addition, hypothetically, let's say you don't even have a big army, it doesn't matter because at least Pathbreaker Ibex will double the power of your creature and then give it trample, both things that are particularly good. The next thing I want to look at in terms of this ability and like benefiting from benefiting from a very tall creature that's easy to get tall is I would like some double strike. Now we don't have like a crazy amount of options, but I think we already have a few that I like. Now, Fire Shrieker is the easiest one. It's nice and simple. Just gives double strike. No, nothing big to worry about. And Holy Avenger as well gives double strike. Just a little more mana, but it has the benefit of putting an aura card from your hand onto the battlefield, which you are playing a few, so it's not nothing. But I don't know. I would play that after Fire Shrieker, and then let's see. Yeah. And then Grappling Hook is the other one I want to talk about. I think this one is potentially the strongest one because it both doubles as giving double strike and giving removal. Now, it is a May trigger, so you still want to be attacking opponents that have no creatures to take advantage of the double strike, but it is removal. It does ensure that whenever you attack with a creature, you still get both. You get to destroy. They're going to block anyways. You get to at least pick what they block with and destroy it. In fact, it then later disincentivizes them from doing multiple blocks. Sorry, there is a dog barking outside. And it disincentivizes them from giving multiple blockers because if they do, you just run through all of them. And then in addition, it works really, really well with trample. So these are all features that I particularly like. If we add this to the fact that you have Duelist's Heritage, which is very good, and we already have at least one cat with Double Strike, I think having these extra access to Double Strike is going to be really good because I think it really powers through your deck. Powers up your deck, sorry. The next thing I'd like to do is to put two different cards in here. Crashing Drawbridge, I think, is really, really good here, as it gives haste across the board every time you tap it. And likewise, it's not Cascading Cataracts. Cataracts. No, what is it? World Enchantment. Concordant Crossroads. It's two C's, but it's something else. Concordant Crossroads, which was recently reprinted, is also a particularly strong card to do this, as it gives all your creatures haste. You want to be able to take advantage of that Eminence trigger every single turn. Obviously, you won't be able to do it on the first turn, but every subsequent turn, you want to be able to take advantage of that. And so by giving your creatures haste, you'll make sure you'll always have an attacker. And in addition, I really like Concordant Crossroads because it escalates the speed of the game and everyone attacks all the time, which means that players are less likely to leave up blockers, and therefore you can get your cats in a lot more often. Now, going back to equipment for a second, I want to also look at trample because that's the other one. There's one more I'm going to look at, but I wouldn't mind a few more things with trample. Behemoth Sledge is interesting because it gives trample lifelink, but it's a lot to cast, a lot to equip. Chariot of Victory is interesting here. I think I might consider that. And Haunted Cloak as well. The rest are fine. Shadow Spear is good too. These will be the ones I'll say. So, Chariot of Victory and Haunted Cloak both have this benefit of Trample and Haste plus a third ability. They both cost the same to cast. They both cost the same to equip. And I think the most important part is whether you value First Strike or Vigilance. And I am more, I'm someone who prefers First Strike because then it keeps your creature from dying in certain circumstances. And there are more than a few cats that have more power than toughness, especially with things like we think Savannah Lion or King of the Pride that adds, an uneven amount of power and toughness across the board. It's good to be sure that First Strike will make sure these creatures trade favorably because they have higher power than toughness. Vigilance is fine. I don't see you attacking with every cat every turn, so having blockers is like it's fine. You don't really need something for it. But at the same time, if you have one really big creature you want to keep blocking with, I get it. I'm not going to be too picky about it. And then Shadow Spear. Shadow Spear is probably the strongest, but it's also, I mean, it's the most expensive, I believe. It's like a $20 card. Excuse me, just having a glass of water. It is the strongest, but it's 2 to equip, which is a little weaker than the other two. It doesn't grant haste, which is a little weaker than the other two. It's definitely something if you want to consider in addition to one of the other two. I'll leave that to you, but I think it is a particularly strong card as well. Okay, what is the other ability that I want? I know there's not a lot, so we're going to start with equipment. I'm going to write Infect. I think it's just the one. I think it's just grafted exoskeleton, but I think you could benefit from this. You're already playing one of the infect creatures. Let's see here. Lost Leonin is a 2/1 infect. By giving it +3, you give it make it 5/4, and then if you were able to give it double strike, which is very doable, by the way. This deck can go turn 1, play anything, turn 2, Leonin, Lost Leonin, and turn 3, play Duelist Heritage, and that's 10 infect to an opponent, as long as they don't have a blocker. That's really impressive. I wouldn't mind more of that, to be honest. And so having access to Grafted Exoskeleton, I think is definitely something worth thinking about. It's not a perfect equipment. If they destroy it when it's attached to something, that creature will die as well. But considering it already gives +2/+2, then you add 3, so it is +5/+5. That's really close to lethal then and there. If you can attach it to a creature that somehow has 5 power, that's a one-shot kill right there. So I think it's definitely worth considering. All right. Beyond that, I think in general, I might consider either a little more equipment or +1/+1 counters. Those are two directions that you probably, instead of going all in, I know I just described a bunch of equipment, but I don't expect you to play all of them. But when it comes to one of Green White's main things that they have, like in unison, that's really strong, is the ability to modify creatures. So that's auras, enchantments, +1/+1 counters. So with that in mind, having having cards that don't need to go all in, let's say on a +1/+1 synergy, instead something that just adds quite a few +1/+1 counters or in addition to trample or something like that, can be really, really helpful because going tall becomes easier and easier and doesn't require a huge investment of cards on your end. And then with equipment, if you wanted to go further in, you could just grab all of the swords of. Oh, okay. Let's do it this way. This is just going to bring me to Wall of Swords. It's just going to bring me Wall of Swords. But the Swords of equipment cycle, where it is a bunch of. Oh, it's Sword of. That's what's happening here. There we go. If you use the Sword ofs, which is the cycle of all of these two-color equipment, you can pick any single one of them, and they'd be particularly good. They just increase your chances of your cats hitting. Um, it's cute to imagine a cat holding a sword in its mouth. I'm a big fan of that. And they're all generally good. Obviously, some are better. Hearth and Home, Forge and Frontier, uh, Light and Shadow, and I believe Fire and Ice would be the ones I would play primarily because they all have particularly good additive abilities. Sword of Truth and Justice is close because of the +1/+1 counter synergy, but Hearth and Home's Forge of Frontier are both really good for getting card advantage and lands in play, which I think are the strongest things for this deck. Light and Shadow is neat because it can reanimate, it can draw you cards from your graveyard, but I don't expect your creatures to die in drones, so I don't think that's as important. Then the last thing I want to kind of talk about is you're playing one, but I wouldn't mind seeing what the other, what are they called again? Changelings are. Let's go into our colors, white, green. See what's here that's playable. Mana value. I like that this is a cat. You could play it because that's cute, but not necessary. Masked Vandal is another way to have enchantment and artifact destruction, but getting cards in your graveyard isn't easy. The flying here isn't terrible, but it does have a bit of a limit. Chameleon Colossus is almost good. I think its synergy of boosting itself based on its power works really well with the main strategy of the deck, but there's only so much that you can do. Valiant Changeling only works with other changelings. Unfortunately, otherwise I would be really quick to suggest this. Now it says creature types. Some of your cats have second types, but I think most of them won't. Cat, 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 cleric, human, cat warrior, cat soldier, cat wizard, cat snake, cat rogue. Yeah, it takes a while to get those abilities because the low ones are they're just cats. So I wish I could easily suggest this, but I don't think it's free to play in this deck. And I think the rest are just fine. Yeah. If you really wanted to, you could play Universal Automaton as another 1-mana cat. It's not nothing. It does attack for 4. It does grow with your other cats, but in the end, it's just a robot cat, and it won't do as good of a job as your regular cats. Trying to think of anything else I'm missing. Looking in your considering pile, I see there's Shadow Spear. Vanquisher's Banner. I meant to talk about this. Um, I think it's fine in here for the fact that it will draw you a card every time you cast a cat. But in the go wide strategy, I don't see it being particularly strong, not in the same way. So I don't love it as much. I'd much rather just be playing. You're playing the Welcome here. You could also just play Guardian Project, which will do the same thing for each of your creatures, but it'll cost 1 mana less. I think that's worth considering. But that +1/+1 isn't nothing, so I do understand that it can be worth playing. Looking here, Triumph of the Hordes. Akroma's Will was one I was going to suggest, so I'm glad it's here. The problem with Akroma's Will is because your commander is so high mana, and you're already at such a big benefit of not having to cast your commander. Only getting half of Akroma's Will's ability is a little lame. It's rough. It's just not as good, but it's not nothing. The flying vigilance double strike aspect of it is very, very strong. The other side just isn't as good. It's really the second half is just really good when you have, you know, when you're getting both halves, or if you have a really wide board. But even then, if you're just picking the second one, you're missing on double strike, which I think is one of the really strong abilities it gives. It's kind of like this card kind of hold on. This card gives I can't apparently show it to you. Hold on. Let's do this little maze. This card's first half is like aggressive and its second half is evasion, is the way I tend to think of it. So unless you have both sides, sometimes you're missing out. Now, it's not impossible to cast your commander in this deck. In fact, I think sometimes you will, but it's important to note. Um, I'd love to tell you to just play Esper Sentinel, but a lot of these cards I want to keep on cat theme. Um, are you not playing this? Is Hungry Lynx not being played? I think you can absolutely play Hungry Lynx. Is it each opponent or is it a opponent? Target opponent. I think I think though this is a very dangerous card because you give someone a bunch of rats, you attack into them, they destroy Hungry Lynx in response, and then you lose your whole board to rats. I think this can be really good if you make a deal with an opponent. If you turn to an opponent and say, "Hey, I'm going to keep giving you rats, but in exchange, don't attack me. Don't like keep my lynx alive because you'll get all the rats. You can attack with them. You can block with them. They'll have death touch. It's pretty good." And with that in mind, I think you can get a lot out of this card because those rats will naturally die, and every time they do, your board grows permanently. Maybe this will need some testing, but I think it's worth playing. Relic Warder is great. I would probably play Relic Warder over a few others like Wild Nactil, which can only be a 2/2 anyways. Um, anything else? If you're going to play all those artifacts, you can play Stoneforge Mystic. I think that's fine. Yeah, I think that's the collection that I think that's what I'd say. Over here, you have a lot of really strong cards. I'll leave that to you. Flowering of the White Tree is okay. If you had more legendary creatures, I would like it, but the fact that it just gives your cats +1/+1 isn't great. Rule of Law is an interesting thing. If Rule of Law is good in your group, you should play it. It's a very good card when it's good. When it's bad, I think you'll rather just be attacking with cats. So I think you need to just think of it in that lens. Okay, so I hope this kind of helps and answers your question about going tall or wide. I think absolutely you should go tall. I think you should be using as many cards that take advantage of that tall creature, and you're already playing a lot of those cards. I think all the cards that go wide should be incidental. Like I think of Pathbreaker Ibex, like I suggested, because it really benefits you going tall, but it has the added bonus of buffing the rest of your team. And I think that's really good. That way you don't have to really worry about leaning too much into the go wide strategy, but it's always there if need be. I think this deck needs to go fast. I wish there was a little more acceleration that we could give this deck, but we're kind of limited because it's got some really explosive turns, especially with Duelist Heritage and other double strike things that I recommended because it makes your cats hit really hard. I think if you're able to get into a clean advantage and take out, like, I think you need to look every time you sit down, I think you need to look at which opponent is going to give you the most trouble, the most controlling deck, the most mid range deck, whoever has the most board clears, whoever has the most removal, and you need to focus them down as fast as possible because that deck will beat you at the end of the game. So if you can take them off the battlefield early, you'll be able to take out your other opponents in a relatively fair way, right? You can just play creatures and go wide, but you need to be able to assess the threat your opponents how threatening they are to you, and you need to take them out in that order. I look very forward to seeing another draft of this deck. Cat Tribal and Arahbo is not something I see often, and I think there's definitely room for this deck to exist. And Arahbo is really cool. I'm a little sad that it has the reputation of being like the weakest Eminence card, but I still think that's pretty much a compliment because Eminence is so strong. If you'd like to send me another draft of this deck or any deck, there is a link in the video description below. And you can send to a form, fill out the form, send it to me, and I'll take a look. If you'd like to skip to the front of the line, because right now we do have a bit of a lineup of decks, there is a way to do that in the link below as well. Finally, if you would like to like, comment, subscribe, do the YouTube thing, I'm always very grateful. The channel is growing. This deck looks like a lot of fun. I think there's a lot of interesting things it can do. And I think with the right hand, this deck can win games extraordinarily fast. All right, good luck.